In today's topic, we will be discussing on real-time application performance monitoring, right from gaining code level visibility into your Node.js and PHP application and .NET Core applications. Next, we'll be discussing into the transaction traces via distributed tracing, which is specifically focusing on the microservices. And the third topic for today would be isolating the bottlenecks in the code stack by using the thread profile option in the application performance management. And finally, we'll be discussing on monitoring the critical app parameters and streamlining the alerts which you see. As we all know, during this pandemic of COVID, most of the teams working remotely from various locations in a distributed way. So this is the time that these teams have to collaborate effectively to deliver exceptional user experience as they work remotely. The challenges of accessing the various IT requests is quite high, and the teams were now facing a spike in the help desk requests for the various monitoring teams. And as there is a high need of the VPN bandwidth due to an external resources being accessed, in terms of security compliance is being most of the corporate needs. Most of the application stakeholders admit that monitoring the application remotely is a quite challenge. And during this webinar, we'll be focusing on how to address this challenge in a most efficient and in a modern distributed way. Let's get started with the first topic of the today, that is gaining code level visibility into your Node.js and PHP applications using the applications manager APM inside. So how an application is built, right? So your application is not a single component. It is a multiple component tied together, something like the database, application code, web server, application server, third-party systems, APIs, webhooks, multiple components. If any of these components goes down, your application might have performance issues. Not only this, few other reasons could include the slow DB calls and method calls, which is present in the code stack, right? So when you get a complaint saying that application is slow and takes time to load, the users receive the request and it is forwarded to the concerned server admin or to the DevOps team, and they analyze the request by gathering the various information from the required stakeholders, right? So all this is the time consuming task. So let's see the common reasons on why your application might be slow. Since the application is built using multiple components, web servers, memory, so web servers typically consume a significant amount of memory from your RAM, and in fact, it consumes a significant amount of hard disk space due to an database usage or due to an cache, anything it could be of. Application might go slow if a web server is loaded with too much request, right? And in fact, it can even go down due to the load balancer issues or misconfiguration issues and memory usage, out of memory exceptions, which could happen internally in the code, and buggy application code, slow DB calls, and slow method calls and web service calls. In the today's session, we'll be most predominantly focusing on the app code related issues, on how to find the kind of problems using the application performance managers is what we'll be primarily focusing. So let's see the traditional application performance troubleshooting and how to overcome this traditional way of uh, performance troubleshooting by using an automated tool like APM Insight. So customers, while they access the web application, say for example, it's a complete user journey. User hit the website, they assume an e-commerce based application. User hit the website and then they log in and then they choose the product and then they purchase and they check out for the payments, and then the transaction is completed. So this is how the entire flow goes for an e-commerce transaction. Say most of the transactions, something like transaction might fail if there is an gateway, payment gateway server issues, which is in the bank or financial institution center. On how to find these problems, or whether it's a transaction failure, what type of exceptions is occurring, all right? So, or if an internal server exception occurs while accessing a specific page, right? So all these requires an high level of business process understanding before we get started, right? So the concerned stakeholders need to understand the business they are in, understand the key business transactions, and then put into those transactions for monitoring. So keeping a track of these transactions is quite important. So when you get a complaint, typically the users reproduce the issue. They analyze the logs, app code analysis is being performed, and then they try to build a fix. So this is how it commonly works. And the disadvantage of this method is high MTTR, and end user experience is definitely being impacted because all these very time consuming tasks that you get the reproduce issues, it takes a significant amount of time, then analyze the logs, and then the app code analysis, and then building a fix and testing the fix definitely consumes time. So how to overcome this? So let's see the modern approach of overcoming this specific challenge. Applications Manager APM Insight is an agent-based performance monitoring solution which will help you to monitor your enterprise-grade productions application in an end-to-end way. In a single pane of glass, you get AppDex, average response time, throughput, error count in a most significant way. And this application performance management is a centralized way since you get the AppDex score, which will help you to see how satisfied the users were with your application performance and how often they were frustrated with the application performance. This acts as a single point of score, a single point of SLA, in fact, which will help you to understand your application performance. So let me switch back to the UI and I'll show you how you can get these applications being monitored. So when you log into the Applications Manager GUI, you have this APM Insight. So once you choose the APM Insight, you can see the applications which is being monitored right here. So you can see the app name, AppDex score, response time, throughput, error counts. So you can get into the application by just choosing the application name. And here you go. You can find the AppDex, average response time, throughput, error count, and exceptions in a high level perspective. All right. So here you could find the satisfied, that is 98.9% of the applications users who were happy with this, and the frustrated count seems to be quite low, 1.1%. And you can find the overall response time, throughput of your web application, how much request can your application will serve for the future request will come in. So that denotes the throughput. Request count that this web server has received. The web application which I'm trying to monitor consists of a Tomcat web server, and the request received by the Tomcat server is being shown here, Apache Tomcat. And if there is any exceptions, that will be again shown here, which shows the overall count of the exceptions. Here again, you can filter the data based upon your requirements. Up to last 1 day, you can get these data. You can find the historical data as well. Now let me go back to the presentation once again and get into the next topic for today. The next topic is tracking the transaction traces via distributed tracing. So before we get started with this topic, let's see what do we mean by the distributed transaction tracing. So distributed transaction tracing, right? Say before we start, 43% of the application performance problems occur because of an issue in the application code, which includes bug in the code, constructs such as long waits, over iteration, inefficient code, uh, inefficient algorithms, in fact, unhandled exceptions, bad choice of data structures. So this APM insight helps you to diagnose the code level issues with the help of distributed transaction tracing. You can track the transaction traces made from one application to another. This would be specifically helpful if your application is distributed across multiple data centers, right? So before we see distributed tracing, so one have to understand what do we mean by tracing, right? So a trace would be an execution flow of a specific transaction, including its method calls, database queries, and exceptions. So one need to focus on the execution flow, right? So your flow starts like this. Say you start the journey by loading the page and then log in and enter the username and password. And if then check whether the username and password is valid. And this is hitting into the database. Once the authentication is passed, it lets the user to get in. So you have to understand the complete journey of the entire user request across multiple applications. So this distributed tracing helps you to understand your transaction path in such a way. And in fact, it broadens your view by showing the entire path a request takes across multiple application and microservices from start to finish. So you can in fact track the application call by adding an HTTP header. So let me explain you on how this distributed transaction tracing works. Say for example, when your application or service makes an API request to another application or microservice, APM Insight agent adds an HTTP header containing the metadata required to track the specific service request. If Application Manager APM Insight is enabled in the other corresponding services, it will process the HTTP header and return the tracking information to its caller via the response headers. So this is how the distributed tracing works. If the other service in turn calls another microservice, the header propagation still continues again and again, thus tracing all the paths taken by the original application or service from start to end. This is how the distributed transaction tracing works in a basic way. To give you a high level information, let me get started by getting into the product GUI, and I'll show you. And before that, let me give you a small information on how you can refine the key business transactions. So once you understand the key business transaction which your application is using, then you can directly monitor those transactions, which is quite important for your core business operation, and understand if there is any specific issue with a specific transaction, understand the overall customer experience with a complete, clear, precise context of what exactly is happening inside your application. All right. So for this, let me switch back to the GUI and let me show you on how this actually works. So let me choose the application, and to find the traces, you can just choose the traces option right here, and then you could see all the transactions, which is where the response time is high, and you can again sort it based on your needs, and which includes the CPU time, external calls, exceptions count, distributed call count. If the specific transaction is spread across multiple microservices, then we show you on how many calls external calls in a distributed way that this specific business transaction is being carried. Okay, that is what is shown in the distributed calls command. Let me get into this specific transaction by clicking this. So once you click the specific transaction, you could see that the specific transaction involves 9 method calls plus 4 SQL calls. And you could get the thread name, thread ID, instance name, response time, CPU time, number of DB queries, and memory used. Most importantly, this specific transaction just uses 135 KB out of the total memory allocated, which seems to be quite less. However, the bytes out seems to be 3.3 MB, and there is a SQL query which is taking long time. So how do I find which query is taking long time and in which method? So you could see that this is the specific method, and this took 3 milliseconds. This is the specific query where this transaction is happening. You can drill down again by choosing the trace details and can find the internal code level invocations, which will help you to understand the customer experience. All right, and including the SQL statements, remote external calls if there is any, and other traces for this transaction, along with its response time and throughput will be shown right here. And you could see that this is a get method transaction. There are a few cases we could see the other requests like post or say, for example, it shows the time frame to find these transactions right here. So it's a get transaction. Just find the query details right here. If there is any exceptions occurring inside your application, you could see those exceptions along with its split up based on the transaction front-end methods and 404 requests if there is any will be shown right here. So I was saying about configuring the key business transactions. So how to understand the key business transaction and what transactions were quite important for your businesses. So here we provide an option called key business transaction, and you could choose the from this list you can choose the key business transactions. Say for example, this is key business transaction for me, and this is the one, and dbaction.do and showagent.do. So I'm just choosing save transactions. So once this is done, you could see that these key transactions were configured successfully, and you could keep a clear track on how these transactions are working. And you can say, for example, you could click those transactions, see a high level view of those transactions. So this is how the configuring the key business transaction works. And if there is any background transactions happening in your web application, those will be listed right here, along with its transaction name and the response time of those transactions. And you could see those details right here. If there is any error transactions, you see there are 404 requests, which seems to be an error transaction, which is listed right here. And you could find these values. You can sort it again based on the request count, total bytes in happening for your application, and average CPU time, and average response time, and total response time of your web application. So again, not only this, you can again drill down to the database level, which is specifically for the DBS and DevOps, and see which specific SQL component is or SQL query is having high response time, which is impacting your overall application performance. See, when you choose this database operations, you could find average response time, and this is the query which is having high response time, all right, which seems to be 24.20 seconds, which is related to this performance actions.do transaction. As a result of this query involved, and you can, when you click that, you can find this. You can in fact view the same transaction performance by just choosing this, which will take you to this page and see how well it is being constructed. All right. So this is how the database operation monitoring works. You can also find the search database operation calls by choosing these by using this keyword, and you can specify which specific transaction or SQL query you wanted to find by just doing a search right here. Again, sorted based on the total response time. You can get a detailed view or table view by choosing these operations, which is quite handy in terms of pinpointing the specific SQL query. Now let me go back to the presentation again, and we'll get into the next topic for today. The next topic for today is understanding the code stack through thread profiling. So before we talk about code stack or thread profiling, let me give you a basic idea of what do we mean by thread profiling, okay, and what is for the code stack. So most of the person the technical team members will know about the code stack, which is a complete bundle of your application code, right from the front end to the back end in terms of full stack perspective. That's the code stack. So the importance of thread profiling for the DevOps team is quite high because it helps you to understand where exactly the bottlenecks were. Say, for example, in APM, all thread profiles were collected in a chosen time or in a window it is listed along with its count, CPU time, and memory allocation. So this thread profiling helps you to understand the thread dump, right? So that you can find which specific thread or code snippet is causing impact to your application performance, specifically for multi-threaded applications. So most of the modern applications were multi-threaded to handle performance from multiple different users for to perform parallel concurrent requests. When multiple concurrent requests were happening, the threads, say for example, the threads allocated for your application is 50. However, due to a surge in the user request, there were few threads which were in the time waiting or in the blocked state, which is causing impact to the other functionality of your application performance. So now you need to find how to release the thread. In order to release the thread, you need to find what exact thread is causing the issue. So when you go to the thread profiling option in the applications manager, you could find which thread is causing the issue and CPU time of those and memory allocated with its complete stack. You could find the high CPU usage consuming threads along with its memory allocated with its thread ID. You could also get the insight of the invocation count of the every method. You could see in the screen, you could see the specific method being listed along with its high level details. So let me take you to the applications manager and I'll GUI and I'll show you how you can perform thread profiling. We are in the applications manager GUI now. To get started with the thread profiling, just choose this thread profile option. And there are two types of thread profiling is available in applications manager APM inside: on-demand thread profiling and scheduled threshold profiling. So to perform scheduled or to perform on demand, just choose on demand thread profiling right here. Choose the profiling duration, something like it, choose 5 minutes, and then you can choose start profiling, which will show you something like thread profiling initiated successfully. And once this thread profiling is initiated, you could see the thread profiles right here, along with its thread count and the minimum CPU time and maximum CPU time, and choose the specific election, and you could find the overall per thread details being displayed right here. So this is how you can perform the thread profiling, okay, to understand the specific thread which is consuming high CPU usage in terms of your application performance monitoring, which is a part of your application performance monitoring. So now let me get back to the presentation and see the internal code level invocations. So as I was talking about, this application manager insight helps you to find these lowest methods calls and counts. Say for example, I pull out a specific report from my web application which involves a significant method being called, and there is a sub methods being called, and sub method again calls another SQL query, which is a chain of actions. So we need to find which specific query is having large execution time and which method is that, and do we, if possible, we can enable caching to overcome this, or can perform a code optimization. All right. So all these can be performed using the code level invocations, which is available in the traces option of APM Insight tab. And you get insight into the problematic code. Say, for example, you get to see this is the transaction. You could see that this transaction is consuming of 10 method calls plus 11 SQL calls. And you could see the method request type, whether it's a post, get, or patch. So you could see those requests along with its response code. So in the screenshot, you could clearly see that this response code is 200, which means this transaction is working fine. The user, whoever hits this transaction, will not have any issues because the response code 200, which seems to be okay status. All right. So you could find these periods in a high level perspective, and there is a hyperlink available called view this transaction performance, which, as I mentioned earlier, which will help you to get the book transaction performance in a whole new perspective. So let's see the benefits of this single unified application performance management. So using this application performance management, you can ensure that your application availability time is always high, which is in fact helpful in terms of managing your web application, and which is a direct impact of your overall revenue, because this web application acts as a front branding for your company or for your business. So maintaining an good stable application performance for your web application is quite necessary, and APM Insight does helps you for the same without any additional tools or without any need of any third-party dependencies. And there is a cost reduction, say for example, to scale up or to build your application or to distribute to multiple data centers. What you do is purchase an additional hardware and add to your existing systems, but uh, adding an hardware or adding an additional physical memory is not the actual solution. You need to find where exactly the issue is. As I was explaining in the previous slides, APM Insight helps you to find exactly the code for problems, exactly the SQL queries, exactly the specific thread which is consuming CPU usage, thus by reducing the overall cost spent in terms of application maintenance and the compliance tracking. You can now track the transactions being used by your users, and whether you can also use this APM Insight for compliance reporting for your overall application performance. And the operational efficiency, you can also see that there is a possible to diagnose the problems in one click, because there is traces which will help you to drill down to find the specific method which is having this issue. So what are the most essential skills which is required for the monitoring teams during this pandemic? So as we are in the new normal, most of the teams needs to be collaborative and flexible in terms of managing a production grade applications, and taking a right decision at the right time is quite important, using the monitored information. Thus by the historical data for data retention comes into the picture, as most of the decisions were data driven. So the historical trending is quite high. So which we will discuss in the upcoming slides on how you can use the historical data of Applications Manager APM Insight to understand and find the problems. Now, let's see the next topic for today, that is the application parameters. So this is one of the new features. So similar to the distributed transaction tracing, which is a new feature of Application Manager, and again thread profile. So adding to that line, app parameters is one of the new feature in APM Insight, which will help you to find the frequency or the operation of an application. To put it in a simple perspective, let me give you an example. Let's say a simple web request involves an API call, database operation, or a cache hit. So this single request can invoke multiple resources, and multiple users can invoke multiple requests at once. So in these instances, you can figure out how often this API was called and how the DB operation took place during a particular time interval. All right, and thus by helping you to access or assess the CPU or memory if it is being overloaded, and how this is affecting your overall app performance for a specific time interval. So you can create multiple views, multiple parameters. So if you need more information on how to construct the app parameters, if anyone needs this information on how to construct this, you can mention in the webinar chat panel. Our expert panelist will send the same link to you. The final topic for today is streamlining alerts and visualize application performance at granular level. Now the Application Manager APM Insight agent is enhanced to provide additional reporting, and it is capable of sending you an alerts based on various application performance related KPIs, key performance indicators of the app specific component. This is a new feature that has been introduced recently in terms of reporting and alarms, adding to the line of distributed tracing. So now you could get the application errors based on its count. You could find the exception count, transaction name, along with there is a filter, show the exception count whose count is greater than or equal to. So you can number the value there, and the transaction based on those count will be listed. So you can get the historical application performance data. So using the APM Insight Application Performance Manager, now you can get the critical app parameters like runtime free memory, runtime total memory, request count, app dex historical data, so that you can analyze the trends for a certain period of time, schedule these reports and get these reports delivered to your inbox automatically, either in PDF or CSV or Excel format, and which will help you to understand the overall performance for a certain period of time. So previously the agent was showing the real-time information. Now we agent is enhanced to provide the historical data as well. So now let me take you to the GUI and I'll show you on how we can configure the same. So once you choose this view, you have this instance, you could just choose that. And right here, have this option called reporting and enable reports. And in the enable reports option, you can choose APM Insight, and the list of metrics for which you can pull the reports will be listed. Satisfied users, tolerating users, frustrated users, request count. You can choose whatever the reports you want and can enable it. So once the reporting is enabled, you can go to reports tab, choose the application servers. Right here, you could choose APM Insight and choose at a glance report of application servers. Okay. So this will actually give you the at a glance report of your applications. It will something look like this. Say for example, availability of my application which I'm being monitoring. So you could find those details right here along with its availability. And health of application servers will be again listed right here. It also fits the some other part of the reporting. So let me go back to the APM site. So once the reporting is enabled, you can again fetch the reports and you could see the errors count. And scheduling the reports is something like you could choose this admin option and schedule the reports, which will through here you could get the reports automatically by choosing the new schedule and get the APM Insight reports being delivered automatically to your inbox. So let's get into the next slide. Streamline alerts for application performance. So how to streamline the alerts for application performance? So you can associate workflow or automation orchestrations activities for the various attributes being listed for your applications, which includes the response time and the other critical metrics. See, and you can perform various automations. Say, for example, if the response time of your web application increases greater than 2000 millisecond, then send an alert to any third-party application via webhooks. If your application being monitored is hosted on cloud, or if you would like to restart a specific cloud service, cloud instance like Amazon EC2 instance or Azure virtual machine, you can perform an automated task by using inbuilt automated cloud actions and get these alerts over Slack by using inbuilt mechanism and perform SQL job-based automations, which would be quite handy for the DBAs. So this is how you could streamline the alerts for the application performance. Let me show you on how you can configure the alerts using the same. So once you go to the configure alarms right here, here you can choose monitor and then you could choose APM Insight, choose your specific application, and then the list of metrics will be displayed. Say for example, server uptime. Okay, so you can choose that. So you could associate the threshold, and there are two types of threshold profiles, and you could choose machine learning and normal threshold profile. If it's just a machine learning, you could choose machine learning, which is an automated feature, and then you could choose this option, and then you could save it. So you could see that it has successfully configured alarm. So it's quite simple. So now we can go back to the page and see whether the action is associated. So now we can choose configure alarms, choose the app, and let's see, you could see that associated machine learning and test automation has been associated to the same for the server uptime. If the server uptime is less than so and so time, then it will be automatically send us the notification based on the machine learning, which is completely based on the automated historical data analysis. If you wanted to associate a manual threshold, you can very well do that as well. Let me go back to the presentation. So almost we have come to the end of the session and see the key takeaways for this specific session. So we have discussed about configuring the application performance monitoring for your production grade applications, tracking the distributed transactions and threat profiling using the distributed tracing feature, and historical application performance data reporting with the various automations for cloud applications and containers. That's what we have discussed for today. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Cheers.